You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. Hurricane Dorian is a Category 2 as it ventures northwards away from Grand Bahama and the rest of the Bahamas, which have been, some of which completely destroyed by this storm. It's been a terrible few days for that area. It's been a draining few days as well for the whole community at large, tracking the storm. We look how that storm looks right now. We feel how that storm looks. That's what I was supposed to say. Terrible joke. Let's tell you what the latest information is. The storm currently has winds of 110 miles per hour and a pressure of 959 millibars. It's at 27.6 north, 78.7 degrees west, 65 miles north of Freeport. The National Hurricane Center released their 3 p.m. update just now, and no change really. The core is moving away from Grand Bahama Island. Dangerous winds and life-threatening storm surge will continue over that island through this evening, as if what we've already seen isn't enough. A sustained wind of 39 miles per hour and a wind gust of 49 miles per hour were recently reported at a weather station in Sebastian Inlet, Florida. So, tropical storm force winds are just about occurring along the coast of Florida right now. So that was expected. At the minute, it doesn't look like hurricane force winds will occur on Florida yet, or maybe even at all as time goes on. We don't know. Florida isn't in the cone for the storm now, but South Carolina is also under a hurricane warning and is in the cone for potential landfall. My name's Nathan Foy. I'm joined in this hour by Strat. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
We have been on this for days, and the storm hasn't moved very much at all, but it is starting to get going now.
I mean, very fortunately so. It's finally starting to slowly move away. I think they're saying 5 miles an hour right now. But it's stayed pretty much in the same spot for 2 days at this point in time, maybe a bit more than that. The same areas have been receiving rainfall, especially Grand Bahama has been receiving hurricane force or strong tropical storm force winds for over 36 hours straight now. And fortunately for Abaca, the strongest convection is just starting to leave now. But the damage reports that we've seen so far are very telling of what happens when the strongest Atlantic system outside of the Gulf of Mexico and Caribbean Sea in recorded history hits at its peak. Direct devastation from the things that we've seen. All buildings, for the most part, have been completely leveled. The only things really left around are cars that are incredibly beaten up and battered, unfortunately. And we are seeing some stories of casualties coming out already. Oh, yeah. Prime Minister calling it an absolute disaster for the country.
This storm's landfall, its initial landfall in the Bahamas, in the Atlantic Basin at least, only has one parallel, and that's the Labor Day hurricane of 1935. Obviously, very few people are around to remember that, and there was very little visuals of the storm as it was occurring, if any, only the aftermath along the Florida Keys. And this is on a par with that. The only storm that we can say is on a par with that storm in the Atlantic Basin, as I've said. And it's just been a crazy few days here. Let me read out the latest warnings, because there are still a lot of warnings in effect, and for some areas the situation could still get worse yet, and will, along the coast of the Carolinas in particular. A storm surge warning is in effect for Jupiter Inlet, Florida to South Santee River. A storm surge watch for north of South Santee River to Cape Lookout. A hurricane warning for Jupiter Inlet to Ponte Vedra Beach and north of Edisto Beach to South Santee River, leaving a gap in between there, mainly along the coast of Georgia. A hurricane watch for north of Ponte Vedra Beach to Edisto Beach, bridging that gap, north of South Santee River, South Carolina, to Duck, North Carolina, and the Albemarle and Pamlico Sounds. A tropical storm warning for Grand Bahama and the Abacos Islands in the northwestern Bahamas, downgraded from a hurricane warning earlier. North of Deerfield Beach, Florida, to Jupiter Inlet, and north of Ponte Vedra Beach to Edisto Beach. The tropical storm watch that was still in effect for Lake Okeechobee has gone. There are no tropical storm watches anywhere. The potential for hazards: tropical storm and hurricane conditions will continue on Grand Bahama Island through tonight. Hurricane conditions are expected somewhere within the hurricane warning area in Florida overnight. Hurricane conditions are possible in the hurricane watch area as early as Wednesday and could spread northward within the watch area through Thursday. In South Florida, tropical storm conditions are expected within the tropical storm warning area through today. We've been seeing a bit of that along the coast. Tropical storm conditions are expected within the tropical storm warning area on Wednesday. Water levels should very slowly subside on Grand Bahama Island and the Abaco Islands through tonight. Near the coast, the surge will be accompanied by large and destructive waves. And the water could reach the following heights above ground, somewhere in these locations in the US if the peak surge occurs at the time of high tide. From the Flagler-Volusia County line to Cape Lookout, expecting 4 to 7 feet. Jupiter Inlet to the Flagler-Volusia County line, Florida, 3 to 5 feet. Water levels could begin to rise well in advance of the arrival of the strong winds. The surge will be accompanied by large and destructive waves. Storm surge related flooding depends on how close the center of Dorian comes to the coast and can vary greatly over short distances. For information specific to your area, please see products issued by your local National Weather Service forecast office, and we'll take a look at some of those later in the hour. Rainfall expectations: northwestern Bahamas an additional 2 to 4 inches, isolated storm totals over 30 inches. Coastal Carolinas 5 to 10 inches, isolated 15. Atlantic coast from the Florida Peninsula north of West Palm Beach through Georgia 3 to 6 inches, isolated 9. Southeast Virginia 2 to 4 inches, isolated 6. This rainfall may cause life-threatening flash floods. Large swells are affecting the northwestern Bahamas, the Florida East Coast and the coast of Georgia right now. These swells are expected to spread northward along much of the remainder of the southeastern United States during the next couple of days. These swells are likely to cause life-threatening surf and rip current conditions. A tornado or two are possible near the immediate east coast of Florida through tonight. This risk will shift to along the immediate coastal Georgia and the coastal Carolinas on Wednesday into Thursday. The next full advisory from the National Hurricane Center will occur at 5 p.m. It's just after 3. Me and Strata here to talk to you for about an hour, discussing the latest on the storm and to take some questions. So if you want to send in a question, send your message into the chat section on YouTube on our stream. Start your message with Force 13, all in text. Dorian isn't the only thing that's going on right now. We've also got Tropical Storm Fernand that formed earlier. It's just off the coast of Mexico, likely to make landfall there, not far from the border with Texas. Probably a weak tropical storm. There is a tropical storm warning in effect for that area. Let me just get that up for you again. Tropical storm warning from Barra del Tordo to the mouth of the Rio Grande River. And they're expecting in northeast Mexico 6 to 12 inches, isolated 15. And in South Texas and the lower Texas coast, 2 to 4 inches, isolated 6. The next update on that is at 4 p.m. Central Time. And you've also got those 2 other systems on the screen, but there's actually 3. I'll just read out those first ones, point to them for you. Disturbance 1 with a 90% chance of development in the next 5 days and in the next 2 days. That one will most likely become our next tropical storm. And number 2 there has a 50% chance of development in the next 48 hours and in the next 5 days. That's moving towards the north or northeast. Could affect Bermuda. Probably will actually, even if it doesn't develop with some potentially heavy rains. Another disturbance, which is still yet to move off the coast of Africa, has a 70% chance of development in the next 5 days, and that one could be a long-tracking Cape Verde hurricane and could become a major hurricane according to what I saw in models yesterday. Haven't had time to look at models today, but certainly the Atlantic is very busy at this time, as is parts of the rest of the world. Hurricane Juliet is a major Category 3 storm with winds of 125 miles per hour. Last I checked, 953 millibars. That storm is expected to peak as a Category 4 later today before starting to weaken out at sea. In the Western Pacific, we have two named systems here as well. Ling Ling is now a typhoon and is moving up towards the southernmost Japanese islands. It will possibly strike Korea as a significant typhoon. Tropical Storm 14W on the right-hand side of the screen could be headed for Japan next week as a significant typhoon. And Tropical Depression Kajiki has been downgraded by the Japanese Meteorological Agency and is just hugging the coast of Vietnam at this time. That is everything that's going on around the world. Our main feature, of course, is still Dorian, and looking back at the satellite imagery, this is how it's looking at this time. Looking appalling compared to yesterday, which is good news for everyone involved, but is still a significant Category 2 hurricane, and possibility that that could be a larger eye coming out in those latest frames, although it would appear to be quite far displaced from the center of the storm, so if it is an eye, it's going to be a huge one, Strat.
Oh, totally. We've started to see this come out in the past 2 hours or so, and it's still questioning whether or not this is a potential eye or just a dry slot. We're going to probably find out soon enough. If it is an eye, though, it's going to be absolutely massive. We're seeing a very similar circumstance to what we saw with Typhoon Trami in the Western Pacific earlier this year. You can see the southwestern side where the eye wall is, just because convection there is much more concise. It's harder to tell where the northeastern side is, though, just based on the fact that convection there isn't nearly as uniform, and wherever it is significantly weaker. But if this isn't actually an eye that comes out, and it could be just because some of the latest frames show a bit more oranges wrapping around the exterior of that opening. This eye potentially will be absolutely huge. You could say it encompasses over a third of the core of the storm when it fully develops, at least on the western side. The eastern side still has significantly more overall convection at this point in time. I am quite curious, though, to see if it actually developed or if it just gets obscured again, though. There's been a few smidges of development trying to happen throughout the past 12 hours or so, and all of them have kind of been squashed out.
Ignore the wind and pressure on the bottom of that panel there. That is old news. No longer a Category 4, I can tell you that. It is a high-end Category 2 with winds of 110 miles per hour and a pressure of 959 millibars now. The National Hurricane Center do expect that the storm will remain at this intensity for the next 2 days, at least. Right the way until it reaches 35 north, which is... where is that? That is close to the coast of South Carolina, when it starts to weaken, I think. Where is 35 on that screen? Is it along the coast or is it near the coast? No, yeah, it's along the coast of North Carolina, I should say. So the National Hurricane Center expects it to remain at this intensity until its closest pass to places like Myrtle Beach, Wilmington. So it could still be packing the same intensity when it gets there.
Yeah, I mean, if an eye actually...
What I'm seeing on satellite strat, looks like it might be a little bit more weakening before that.
I mean, potentially. It depends. If this is an actual eye that manages to come out, maybe it could sustain an intensity like that to the Carolinas, where it is right now 110 miles an hour. But if it continues to struggle like this and the current slight burst of convection that's coming up doesn't sustain itself, then we're probably going to see some more weakening before that point in time, which for all areas involved in the near future is extremely beneficial.
But from what I've been seeing on models, and I'll get the latest model runs on the screen shortly, they are actually calling for a bit of a secondary peak that might occur tomorrow night. So if the storm weakens a bit here, it could come back for a secondary peak tomorrow night at or near Category 3 intensity.
Yeah, and that's still definitely a possibility. Conditions aren't extremely hostile ahead of it right now. The reason it's weakened so much is just the
It
upwelling. A
stopped
Category
moving.
5 storm of its caliber, exactly, because it stalled out, it just sucked up all the energy, and there was nothing left for the ocean to give to it, and it just started feeding off itself and winding down.
We've got some questions here. Um, I've been tracking this for a while now. Seems to be moving approximately 3 miles north for each 2 miles west. Can you confirm this movement? So that would just be a movement slightly north of west, slightly north of northwest. Sorry. I'll get some information on that. I'll look back through the last few hours and let you know how far it's moved. I've forgotten the numbers from earlier. I did make a calculation before we started, quite some hours ago now. Just running the numbers again. At the moment, it's moving more like just west of north. So it's moved in the last, 4 hours. It has moved 27 miles north-northwest, very close to north. So you would say there for every, let's see, 26 miles north, 5 miles west. So it's gone 1 mile west for every 5 miles north in the last 4 hours.
Yeah. I mean, which the fact that it's not heading more west northwest or north northwest is also a positive. Just relating to that, someone asked a question if it's possible for it to make a landfall in Jacksonville and then turn to the northeast. That is almost that's extremely unlikely. Florida is not in the cone of uncertainty at all,
Yeah.
so this would need to extend significantly outside what we would potentially expect for a landfall.
NHC have made a massive error if there's going to be a Jacksonville landfall.
Yeah.
It is extremely unlikely. Just to point out, anywhere within the cone can get the center of Dorian's eye as a landfall. So places that really need to watch out, basically anywhere that's under the South Carolina hurricane warning northwards through the hurricane watch zone. Anywhere along there could get the landfall of the storm. Places south of the hurricane warning in South Carolina most likely won't get the landfall of the storm, but could still get hurricane conditions as the storm bypasses those areas, or in the tropical storm warning zone, tropical storm conditions, which are very likely along the whole coast.
Reiterating, Florida exceeding the unlikely landfall, but the Carolinas could still see one. I am expecting later today those North Carolina hurricane watches to be extended to hurricane warnings. Probably just because the time frame is going to start to fit in more with it. We're going to see the track shift up, and then probably within the next 2 days or so, we'll start to see potential watches start to pop up for Canada as well.
Yeah.
Just because, at least for Nova Scotia, they're expecting that this thing could potentially still be tropical at that point in time before hitting Newfoundland as a probably post-tropical system, but a hurricane force post-tropical system, which for tropical cyclones to still be at hurricane intensity while turning post-tropical is pretty rare. So another
Well, this part of the world not hugely rare. You might get maybe one every year or two on average. We haven't had one for a while.
But for exactly, we had none last year. I don't think we really had any the year before either.
But sometimes you can get a lot.
Yeah, they're either clustered or
they
occasional
really.
at most.
Might be one of those years that get storms like
so
that.
So who knows? Maybe we'll see 2 or 3 more this year.
Well, who knows? But I just want to point out the National Hurricane Center cone does continue to shift east at each update. And I can tell you why, because the storm is quite simply moving east of the forecast. And it is still doing that right now. From the latest National Hurricane Center forecast, which is just over 3 hours ago, it has moved 19 miles east of the track forecast. So National Hurricane Center will be forced to move the track east again at their next update at 5. Looking again, this is the most recent model run. In fact, I wonder if the 18Z run is out now. So that was the 12Z run from earlier, showing that the storm is is likely to, well, almost follow the National Hurricane Center track, really. No, we still don't have the 18Z data yet, but we will do very soon, I should imagine. And as for intensity, this is something I wanted to point out in particular. Model consensus there is for the storm to have weakened a little bit, as it has, from Category 3 down to high in Category 2, but a lot of the models want it to strengthen again just a little bit back to Category 3 status tomorrow night, and then start to weaken again. There could be even a third peak when we get to about day 3 to 4, a little uptick there again when it's Category 1, possibly nudging back to Category 2, so you never know. That will be when it's out at sea, headed for Atlantic Canada, and then it would be weakening again later on. So that's something interesting to look out for, and we'll see. Hopefully this hour we'll get the later model run, the newer one, from 18 UTC, and maybe we'll see if there's any differences there. There might be.
Yeah, and at least for now, with the storm moving significantly east of the forecast track, very beneficial news for the southeast United States.
And this has been happening since the stalling motion started near the Bahamas yesterday. So Florida has been very lucky since then, even though some parts of the coast are now getting tropical storm force winds. I really suspect, somewhat doubt, whether hurricane conditions will actually happen on Florida, but certainly be on your guard for that, especially along the East Coast. Hurricane warning still in effect. It is not safe to return back to normal. We've had questions off the air about whether it's time to pull down the shutters and pack them all up and all that, but at the minute, no, not as long as you're in a warning zone.
Yeah, until you see those warnings listed, which means officials that know your area best are saying, hey, we know this thing is past for now, and you're no longer in any significant danger. You can go back to the way things were prior. It's very safe to play by ear and listen to those warnings. Caution against just going to normal activities outside, especially when you're in parts of Florida right now that are experiencing tropical storm force sustained winds as well, with that convection barely offshore. But so again, close. Florida has really escaped relatively unscathed compared to what we thought could happen. As soon as that stalling motion started, the storm just never took a more westward movement that some of the models were initially expecting, and the NHC in turn were thinking that it would have. Really got off lucky for a very populated parts of Florida that could have had much more severe problems. But, especially at the Carolinas, we're not there yet. There's still landfall possible there. And even if there isn't, models in general bring it very close to the shore of North Carolina before pushing off at minimum.
Things are just getting started there.
Not really. There still isn't even a warning to North Carolina yet. I'm expecting this to come up later today, probably, just because the time frame is going to start to fit. Northern South Carolina and all of the North Carolina coast still have those hurricane watches up. We'll probably see those upgraded soon. And then, you're going to see another level of alert come into effect with the state of emergencies already declared in all of those states. And maybe see parts of Virginia come up with watches and warnings soon as well, because they've already declared a state of emergency as well. Fortunately for other mid-Atlantic states that looked like they could have been in the cone yesterday and a day and a half ago, they're no longer in it. But you do have to keep track of the wind field possibly expanding significantly, bring at least some winds to portions of the mid-Atlantic, at least gusty conditions, potential rainfall is a threat at this point in time for them. And then maybe down the line for Cape Cod as well. But fortunately, with this continually eastward shift on the track, those areas are looking to get minor impacts at most, when the conversation a few days ago was thinking, could we potentially see actual more serious conditions there?
Well, live this hour, question and answers as well. So send your questions in live on the chat. Start your message with Force 13 all in text. We'll be here to pick them up. Here are some of them now. Could this storm still intensify? Well, we pretty much covered that just before. It certainly could, towards a secondary peak, Category 3 maybe. And what kind of satellite are we looking at on the screen? This is infrared satellite. It is not radar, so they are satellite indications of the storm. With radar, you can see things much more clearly. I don't have that at the minute, but you can certainly check radar from the National Weather Service local offices, and I just don't have it at my desk here. Some of our other team members can put radar on the screen, but none of them are around at the moment.
Yeah,
So,
I'll pull it back.
well, yeah, if
It
you
shouldn't be
want to, sure. Whilst I take some more questions, let's see here. Is there a chance for it to take the east turn very late, such as staying northwest landfall in Jacksonville, then turning east? Well, it won't be Jacksonville, but there is that possibility it could make landfall in South Carolina, and then turn towards the east. But yeah, hurricane force winds, if the storm is continuing northwest, are possible all along that coastal region under that hurricane warning. What's happening with Tropical Storm Fernand? And that one has formed in the last few hours, not far from the coast of Mexico. Tropical storm warnings in effect. National Hurricane Center issuing advisories on that. And just to check, I haven't actually checked what they're expecting for the peak intensity. I doubt it's going to be very strong.
Yeah, it's hard to tell
45.
because they didn't expect it to become a tropical storm until tomorrow morning. The fact that it's done so already will probably raise their forecast peak a little bit. Not by much, but it's very doubtful that something like this could reach hurricane intensity in such a short period of time.
Well, it's been done before, you know.
That's true. Katia of last year managed to spin up really quickly. But this system is much more broad than Katia was last year.
Maybe 50 miles an hour.
Yeah, that's what I would anticipate just by the fact it's reached tropical storm strength sooner than expected.
More questions. I've heard some say landfall near Cape Canaveral, and what is our input? Well, put it this way, the storm is probably moving slightly further north in direction right now than Matthew was, and it's further off the coast than Matthew was. I cannot see it making landfall on Cape Canaveral at all here. When you watch this loop, you can even see that the storm center isn't getting anywhere near. However, tropical storm conditions will probably occur there, and if the storm does take a wobble to the west, then maybe it will just put it inside hurricane force winds. It would still take a lot for that to happen, actually. But Cape Canaveral, tropical storm conditions likely. Landfall from the storm, very unlikely. It's not in the cone, so even the National Hurricane Center aren't on board with that possibility at this time. Let's see. Just seeing if we have anything else at this time. How fast is it spinning on the outer bands? Well, we don't really measure the speed of the movement on those outer bands, but I don't know if you've got any inclinations, Strat.
I mean, just based on the pace that we see them move at, those bands move pretty quickly. The reason that rainfall and stuff is sustained is because new convection kind of spins around the storm again. I would say dozens of miles an hour is how quickly those are moving. I don't really have a direct estimate. You need to look at how quickly each specific piece is moving on satellite. I don't really have the mathematical or analytical skills just based on looking at one imagery without latitude, longitude to really presume that. But what we can say for certain is that impacts are extending further and further away from the center as the storm continues to evolve and start to weaken.
Yeah, but you can sort of make some assumptions on that, because when you see the recon estimating flight level wind speeds, then that is obviously the cloud level, and it's moving at the same speed, I should imagine.
Yeah, you'd presume so.
Speaking of which, are they going into the storm today?
There is one going into Fernand right now, actually.
Really?
Yeah, there's one going off for there, and there's another one that's took off from the Florida Panhandle. It's crossing the Florida Peninsula right now to go back into Dorian as well, AF309. And then they're taking the more advanced plane, NOAA 2, into Fernand instead.
It's becoming increasingly clear on the imagery strat that this is probably a new eye coming out, and it's going to be huge.
Yeah, we're almost seeing a repeat of Trammy from earlier this year in terms of,
Wasn't that last
Category
year?
5. No, I think it was this year. It may have been last year. Recently. A very powerful system, stalls over water, it sucks up all the energy, upwells heavily, weakens itself, and then at this disorganized, much weakened state, a massive eye starts to come out as it starts to move northwards. Very similar, both scenarios.
The question here, the conditions in Marsh Harbour still hurricane, or are they now tropical force? They've been down to tropical storm force for quite a while. Let me just have a little look now at what they're expecting there at the moment. Just going to take a quick look. The Marsh Harbour area is probably still experiencing minimal tropical storm force winds right now. Grand Bahama will still be experiencing wind speeds of 60 miles per hour or greater. Parts of the coast of Florida experiencing lower tropical storm force winds. Nowhere is getting anywhere close to 60 miles an hour just yet. They are getting sustained winds in some areas in the 40s, with wind gusts in the 50s, I believe. But nothing too disastrous right now. The main extent of the storm is offshore. And if were there more questions?
I mean, if there's any new ones, then start to mess with Force 13 on Texter at Force 13, so it lights up in a bright orange for us. I mean, there's not one related to Dorian, but someone is asking, is Japan going to get hit by a typhoon?
It's possible.
Which is related to the Western Pacific ones.
Tropical
I think it's
storm
14W.
14W. Just a minute. Let's go and quickly look at some imagery from around the world. First of all, the obvious, which is Dorian, obviously. Ignore the wind speed at the bottom, that just hasn't been updated. It is 110 miles per hour right now and a pressure of 959. You can see the storm's evolution in the last 10 hours or so. Still looking decent on visible imagery, but you can see underneath the infrared looking fairly poor, although the eye is starting to come back out. Another view here, this probably tells you more, the air mass imagery, the bigger panel, showing that eye starting to come back out again. Juliet looks like this today. That is a Category 3 storm out in the eastern Pacific. Moving out to sea, will peak later as a Category 4 most likely. 14W still hasn't been named by the Japanese Meteorological Agency or even acknowledged yet on their chart, but it is blowing up some significant convection, partially exposed still at this time. Long-term forecasts expect that it will go towards the northwest and possibly affect Japan. 16W, which is Kajiki, that is along the coast of Vietnam. JMA have washed their hands of it. I don't know whether JTWC have yet, but it is still there along the coast. Ling Ling looks like this, had an established eye earlier, and I'm not sure what's going on now. Not looking so great. Maybe the eye has just crumbled away and might go about establishing another one at some point. It's going to be one of those messy West Pacific storms by the looks of it. Quite large, could deliver large amounts of rain looking at that convection. And this is Invest 93, if that's not been named by now, because I've lost track of what storm's got a designation or not. Well, that doesn't look very good, so I assume it's still an Invest. And this one is 94. Well, that isn't 94 on the screen. That's where Kajiki is. Unless something strange has happened with that as well. Okay, well, let's move away from that confusion. That again is the track there of Hurricane Dorian. I believe we're now joined by David as well. Well, I thought we were. Strat, go ahead.
Yeah. I was just saying, just for clarification with some of those Western Pacific systems, the JTWC still has Kajiki as a tropical depression. They're still tracking it. And for 14W and potential Japanese impacts, the consensus is that it probably will make landfall in central Japan. There's certainly legal room for that to be.
Yeah, I am here.
Yeah, good evening, David. How are you?
Sorry, hi viewers. I'll just come on, and in about a minute we'll be simulcasting on Facebook. But as I said, it's good to be here.
Okay, thank you. We've got plenty more questions. Lakeland is getting some pretty nasty weather with wind and rain, and gloomy is a statement, a comment that we receive here, Strat. And definitely in association with the storm, you can get thunderstorms and bursts blowing through in relation to Dorian. That can happen at any time. We'll want to take a look at
Almost
radar
definitely.
for that, Strat.
Yeah, let me pull that up for you really quick.
Whilst he does that, let me get to some warning information locally. First of all, some flood warnings as we go to that radar screen now. A river flood warning remains in effect for the St. John's River above Lake Harney near Geneva and for the St. John's River at Astor. They're expecting minor flooding there. And let's just see. They're expecting 8.0 feet, which is flood stage. Just trying to sift through some more information here as well. Flood warning is cancelled for the Withlacoochee at Holder and Peace River at Zolfo Springs. Flood warning continues for Cypress Creek at Worthington Gardens. So those are two areas in central Florida. Let's see if there's anything we can get from some hurricane local statements. Nothing really that we've not already explained. Coastal flood advisory remains in effect until 4 a.m. Eastern Time Thursday. High rip current risk now in effect through late Wednesday. This is for... Where is this for? It's along Florida. Sensitive and low-lying locations along the Atlantic coast and the Intracoastal Waterway may experience flooding. That is from the Miami, Florida office. High surf advisory as well, obviously, until 1 a.m. Eastern Time Thursday for Atlantic coastal areas and inland waterways of southeast Georgia. Small craft advisories as well, no surprise there. Just looking further north here to see whether there's any other flood-related warnings or anything to that effect out there right now. Nothing else in Florida, I don't think. And looking further north to Georgia, I don't think anything's out there yet apart from the warnings that have already been issued by the National Hurricane Center. There is a flash flood watch in effect for portions of southeast Georgia and southeast South Carolina. The following areas in southeast Georgia: coastal Bryan, coastal Chatham, coastal Liberty, coastal McIntosh, and inland Chatham. In southeast South Carolina: Beaufort, Charleston, coastal Colleton, coastal Jasper, Dorchester, inland Berkeley, inland Colleton, inland Jasper, and tidal Berkeley from Wednesday afternoon until late Thursday night. So that's a flash flood watch for that location. High surf advisories out, rip current statements, beach hazard statements, everything obviously you would expect with this hurricane. What are we looking at on the satellite imagery? Well, it does look like there is a significant area of red there that just passed Interstate 4.
Yeah, and I have this radar up if one available if you want to start to take a look at this too.
Yeah, we've got it. That's what we're looking at right now.
Okay.
So
Perfect. You can see
that is Lakeland, isn't it? That's just that's just
blown
blown through there.
It's supposed to be too offshore to get the best look at the eye itself. The Miami, Florida one's too far out, so we're at the Lakeland one. You can tell. I think this is the Orlando one actually, just about. But you can see still pretty strong convection on the northwestern side, and you can see the eye is pretty well defined with an eye wall on the northern west and the western sides, and somewhat on the southern side. That looks to be the weakest one that we can see. Just based on infrared satellite imagery that we've been able to see as well, it's easy to presume that the eastern side is definitely the weakest by a good margin. But that eye is potentially starting to clear out, and you can see these heavy bands of convection that are flourishing on the northwestern side of the system, trying to wrap around. And you can see that convection moving on shore in bursts too, around Orlando and kind of just circling around. Some of it's even reaching Tampa and Sarasota as well, a bit towards Fort Myers and Naples a tiny bit.
But yeah, I'm looking
Daytona
at that little cell that literally went through Lakeland just now.
Yeah, there's a couple cells, and there's a few larger bands that are coming along. Orlando just being missed now for the most part. Melbourne's getting some convection. If this moves a bit further west or a bit more expansion of
Squally
convection,
weather, possibly.
they'll get sustained squally weather. Yep. West Palm Beach still seeing squalls. Fort Pierce as well. Fort Lauderdale potentially getting some. St. Augustine starting to move into harm's way with convection too. But you can see it extends pretty far. Gainesville potentially getting some bands. It's very on the edge of the radar for this one. Ocala definitely getting some bands starting to move in. Those will move in within the next hour or so as well. Just right now, on the coast, tropical storm force winds for some areas, and then for the rest of the peninsula right now, for the most part, very squally conditions all about.
So, question: how large is a storm in miles? Well, putting out the significant rainfall field is about 265 miles east to west. North to south, I think it's quite a bit bigger. Yeah, definitely much bigger. North to south, the significant rain area extends 350 miles. And certainly the eye is coming back out. So this is an interesting period that we're entering here, because it was on the ropes this morning, but it is looking a lot better in latest imagery, which is now on the screen. You can quite clearly see where the center of the storm is, the new eye, and maybe possibility for a little bit of re-intensification.
Like I know earlier you said, we were talking, SATID wasn't even possible because the storm was looking so abhorrent.
Yeah.
Which is just, another way to describe like disgusting. But I would presume it's possible to do now, probably.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it will be possible to do our satellite estimates on this, because the eye is visible again, but that would take me a few minutes of airtime to do.
Yeah. And, there's convection starting to try to wrap around. You get negative 60s and 70s almost completely on the southwestern half of the storm now, at least for the core of it.
And we keep banging on about eye temperature, and I can tell you the temperature of the eye is now back to minus 19 degrees. Which is sort
of its coldest earlier?
Which is sort of getting there. Well, the coldest was no eye at all. So minus 60, minus 70, whatever. Once you get temperatures nearing or reaching the positives, then you have a pretty strong storm on your hands. Minus 18.7, that's not all that bad, and that could improve again a little bit later on. We'll just have to see.
Yeah, and let's not discount that just because the storm has weakened a lot since its peak of 185 miles an hour, that it's no longer dangerous and intense system. 110 miles an hour is still more than enough to cause a lot of damage, even if it doesn't make a direct landfall. Just for comparison, Irene was a tropical storm when it made landfall in New York City, and a Category 1 up most of the coast. That was retired, for example. Sandy... much different circumstance with size and such, but it was a Category 1 in terms of intensity at its landfall as well.
Well, this is still a CDPS Stage 5, which is... I'm trying to compare it to something right now.
I think it's... Yeah, but for areas that's already hit, though, in the Bahamas, still Stage 10 by a large margin, but for future potential areas, a Stage 5 at this point in time. Just the sheer amount of damage done on Abaco and Grand Bahama, I can't even begin to fathom. There was a document that was made by them to track missing people. A lot of those marks are unfortunately still not checked at this point in time.
How long is that list?
It was posted last night that it was at least over a few hundred people long at minimum.
Really?
I don't have the direct number on me anymore, but it was definitely a lot.
All right.
Yeah, I didn't give like a raw number on it, but it did state a lot of names.
Sure.
And one of the I'm not sure his name, but you'll probably be sure. A notable storm tracker was actually on that list as well. Storm Chaser, I think his name's probably, yeah.
Yeah, we don't know anything about that at the moment. I've no idea at this point. For a lot of those people on the islands, I mean, storm surge will have reached the tops of some buildings that have multiple floors.
Grand Bahama's maximum elevations are 40 feet. So when this was coming in, it had a storm surge of 18 to 23 feet plus.
Like, the surge wasn't bad enough. You've got 185-mile-an-hour winds.
Yeah, and then tropical storm and hurricane force sustained winds staying around for days and days too. It's been over 2.5 days at this point in time that Abaco and has had tropical storm force winds. 2 days for Grand Bahama at this point in time, and storm surge is still affecting it. Some of the videos that were coming out yesterday for Grand Bahama, not Grand Bahama, Abaco, even though the storm, the core of it was nowhere directly near it at that point in time, still had complete inundation of the island. And I was presuming similar circumstances are happening in Grand Bahama right now. Emergency sources of work, and probably still are completely cut off with emergency numbers that had gone offline as well. So we're just seeing still horrendous circumstances play out, and we're just hoping that the storm moves away as quickly as possible. This moves much slower than they actually said it would. They were saying that last conditions would subside by last night for Grand Bahama. They're getting better, but they clearly still haven't subsided. If they're still going through tropical storm force winds and
60
heavy
miles
rain
an
and
hour
probably
at
still
least.
storm surge, yeah. So it that's
Alright,
positive. for the
Strat,
United
this is
States
very
for
interesting. I've just got a SATID reading. This is Force 13's own method of determining a storm's intensity from the satellite imagery presentation. And I can tell you it's very much in line with the current National Hurricane Center, 111.
Yeah, so teetering on Cat 2, Cat 3 status. It's a borderline at this point in time, really. That doesn't really change anything at this point, though, in what it can do and what it already has done. So, yeah, and just an update for that document, was it iCyclone is still not available at this point. He's still missing. It's not just Google Doc anymore. There's actually a website that's been made to track it. Someone has made a website and uploaded it completely.
Oh,
it's
right.
keeping the information up to date.
Would you like to reveal
Actually, I will post that in the chat right now. It's DorianPeopleSearch.com. I'd only potentially post in it if you have relevant information. But this is definitely a great public source that people are able to use to help keep track of their loved ones and people that are potentially in harm's way, to make sure that as many people as possible are safe. A lot of these names are filled in, fortunately, but at least a few hundred are still not at minimum. This is a very long and exhaustive list. It looks like more than half are accounted for, but there's still enormous amounts of people that are not.
And some people are... we're all obviously hoping that the storm's weakening, and we'd be the first to say it if we really thought that was happening, but at the moment I cannot tell you that the storm is weakening, unfortunately, at this point. It has obviously weakened a lot in the last 24 hours, down to 110 miles an hour, high-end Category 2, but at the minute, with that eye reforming, it looks like it could maintain its intensity, and we could possibly see another little ramp up in intensity during the course of tonight, tomorrow.
Yeah, that is a possibility. And also, just an extension on that website, there is a subsection on that site for relief organizations. So if anyone is considering contributions to help the recovery, there are numerous sources for local areas like Treasure Cay and Eblo Cay, for example. And then there is also a few broader sources for Abaco and Grand Bahama as a whole. The ones for Abaco, only Treasure Cay and Eblo Cay were direct landfalls at the peak intensity were recorded, while the other ones are just for the whole area as a whole. So if anyone wants to check that out and is feeling like that they may want to contribute, potentially, I'll post the link once more in the chat just for people to be able to see. DorianPeopleSearch.com. Very good Samaritans being able to put that together in such a short period of time.
We're looking now at the visible imagery of the storm here, and you can see the eye, the shadow of the eye. It's there-ish. Obviously, it's rather unclear, full of clouds. It is a total mess, but you can certainly see from the shape that the eye is coming back, and it's going to be quite a large one. For instance, the eye could fit in the gap between Grand Bahama and Great Abaco Island
It was
Now,
doing that earlier at its smaller size.
now the eye is about between 2 and 3 times the size of it as it was when it was moving through that area.
Yeah, so a market expansion in the size of the eye, and that's probably going to reflect in the near future once it fully forms. The size of the storm in turn is probably going to expand significantly as well. So that is something that does increase the threat for the Carolinas and potentially Georgia as well, where watches and warnings are already up at this point in time, and the models actually weren't doing that bad at predicting a potential size increase, to be honest. Um, I guess the main flaw they had was just that everyone had really was not being able to properly track that once this stalled the initial movement, and anything that would have started wouldn't have been back to the west northwest or just west in general. That we were seeing a northeasterly to northward movement for the most part, which for the United States is extremely beneficial.
Derek asks about Jensen Beach. We expect to get hit with winds and rain as the north side of the storm spins around? Question mark. At the moment, the storm is pretty much making its closest approach to you there right now. So, odds are conditions won't get any or very much worse than they already are. I've no idea what the conditions are there. Certainly the potential for tropical storm force winds to be occurring there in the next 3 hours at least. And tropical storm force gusts are possible all the way through tonight.
And you're going to start to just see these conditions start to move up the coastline bit by bit as the storm finally starts to move. The 4 p.m. update isn't out yet by the NHC. I presume maybe it'll show 6 miles an hour now, and very similar pressure. The recon plane is entering the storm right now. It's on the periphery, already recording tropical storm force winds. It's coming in from the northwestern quadrant. We're probably going to get a center pass within the next 30 minutes or so. So for people that are into that, once this commentary is over, Recon will be flying in and getting more data. And I'm sure in future video updates that we will have on the system that these will definitely be reflected along with any intensity changes that occur.
Yeah, David, are you with us? David?
Yes, I am. Nathan, apology for that.
Now,
I'm just
a lot of
searching
people
for...
have probably seen images, but you've just posted this one, and I saw this one earlier today.
Yes, I've
tell us
got
about
another
it.
3. Now, that's off Twitter. Aerial photos, or photo of a backhoe. Officials flew over the area today to survey the damage. The Prime Minister said Hurricane Dorian visited unprecedented. Apology for that. Devastation on the island.
Well, it looks like it. That's all I can say looking at that. Complete destruction.
It's another one.
Yeah, almost no buildings left standing, really. And from earlier reports as well, similar things in Grand Bahama. The Grand Bahama Airport, last I heard, was still under 6 feet of inundation as well. So just terrible circumstances have been unfolded. I think the Prime Minister is using quotes such as unprecedented tragedy for casualty and loss of life, as well as potential. There's been numerous reports out so far showing that the potential death rate is far higher than the potential 5 that have been reported so far from Abaco. Just take another look at the images that David is posting. Just absolutely terrible to see. Almost no buildings left standing from this, and any that are almost certainly damaged. You see some of the aerial shots. Very few things left unscathed at all.
I'm just trying to make out what
scenario.
Are those small like houses on the left-hand side of that last image, all very tightly packed in there. And
I think they may have been moved.
But I don't know. I've honestly no idea. Have they just been moved straight off of the foundations and dumped there, or what? That is
I mean,
incredible
it's
imagery.
based
Of
on
It
the
some of the
is.
worst
damage. It's
kind.
possible because you don't see any direct, roads linking them all together from the inside. You only see a few outer perimeter rings. You can't even really make out if those are roads or just kind of smashed up bits that where water was
Hmm.
connecting. Just based on the sheer proximity, it's possible that these are houses that have been moved completely off the foundation. Is this larger segment in it an airport, or what is this exactly?
Sorry, which one are we talking about now?
It was the very bottom one. It was the last one you were showing.
The
That
last
David
one.
was recently.
There it is again. An airport? I don't see one.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I think that's on Grand Bahama,
Is
where
it?
the airport's under 6 feet of inundation as of the last report.
I'm not so sure about that because there's no inundation on that image.
Yeah. No, this is Albico, right?
I've no idea. David, do you know?
Yeah.
Somewhere on a backhoe.
All
and,
three
Yeah.
of those
Okay.
images that we've just shown are right.
Yeah. So just complete devastation.
Yeah,
Absolutely terrible to see.
I'm just looking at a close up, and I think they've all been swept.
all those buildings.
Swept away. Yep. Especially there on the right-hand side.
Wow. That was just crazy. Probably somewhere near the landfall zone. This storm made an 185 mile an hour landfall. Very few areas, inhabited areas, have ever seen those kinds of winds. Thinking back to previous 185 mile an hour landfalls, only one in the Atlantic, the Labor Day hurricane in 1935 over the Florida Keys. Elsewhere
And
around the world, Typhoon U2 on
Saipan.
Tinian, just south
Was it
of
Tinian?
Saipan, where the worst conditions were. Rather sparsely populated, a little bit less so than the Bahamas, I think. Other 185 mile an hour landfalls, Typhoon Megi in 2010, sparse part of the Philippines. Obviously, Typhoon Haiyan was 195 miles an hour. There's not much difference when you get to that sort of wind speed. And imagine what the wind gusts were. That's probably what'll do it. Wind gusts of 225 miles an hour from this storm.
That's what
No,
they're
you said-
saying.
Sorry, Stratton. That posting was 2 hours ago on Twitter.
I thought it would have been further back than that because I've already seen those images earlier today. But regardless, they are
Yep,
in
it's
existence.
graphic.
And that's how it's looking. We're only covering an hour of discussion at this point, so we're finishing up here, throwing it back to the automated graphics and imagery. We're going to have more opportunities to discuss the storm later on this evening. I'm not sure exactly when we'll be back yet. I think it'll probably be around 7 or 8 p.m. Eastern Time, where we'll have another discussion on the storm. For the time being, we'll throw you back to the satellite imagery, where you can watch in real time the progression of this storm. The last image on this loop is just 6 minutes old, so every few minutes there's a new one, and you'll see everything as this storm continues to unfold and as that eye starts to come out. Just before we go, National Hurricane Center, they should have their update now. Yep, 110 miles an hour, 959 millibars, the eye wall moving away, hurricane moving nearly parallel to but offshore of the east coast of Florida. A sustained wind of 42 miles an hour and a wind gust of 60 miles an hour were recently reported at the weather station in Melbourne Beach, Florida. Till next time, we'll have more discussion. I think we're going to go for 8 p.m. Eastern Time for our next chat here on Force 13 Live. In the meantime, subscribe to the channel. There's plenty of stuff going on as well apart from this, and I'm sure our team will provide updates, and also on our social platforms, Facebook and Twitter. But from us for now, that's it, and we'll continue to watch this storm extremely closely. Have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you again at 8.